The African American Legends series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in varied areas as varied as politics, aviation, business, sports, literature, religion, and education. We'll explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they've been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Evelyn Jones-Rich, president of Labor Arts, an organization dedicated to exploring labor through the arts. Welcome to African American Legends, Evelyn.
I'm glad to be here and very anxious to explore with you the wonderful work we do at Labor Arts.
Now tell us, how did Labor Arts get started?
Labor Arts was the brainchild of Donald Rubin. Don Rubin was then the president of MultiPlan, a preferred provider organization, which is a healthcare company. He made millions of dollars in MultiPlan and subsequently sold the company. However, Don's father was the founder of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union. And so his interest in the labor movement has been continuous ever since his birth. He has wonderful stories to tell you about, and me, about organized labor's intrusion, for example, into the labor movement. In any event, Don said, gee, it would be wonderful to harness the wonder of the internet and bring it to bear on the labor movement. So let's create a website, and it will be a virtual museum. And what we will do is explore the artistic and cultural examples of the labor movement. People normally, when they think of the labor movement, they think of the more tangible results, like the 8-hour day, retirement benefits, pensions, health care. But Don said, let's look at the other side. And so he put up a few dollars, and we created this site. And it celebrates aspects of little-known aspects of the labor movement.
Does it include photographs as well as traditional art?
We have a range of what we call images. And those images include photographs, leaflets, songs, other kinds of artifacts that labor unions use in their strikes and in their demonstrations, and they are all on exhibit on our site, which is laborarts.org.
Now, when you want to check out the music, let's say you want to see Joe Hill talking about it, do you have that on the site?
That's a wonderful question, Roscoe, and the answer is yes. We have Joe Hill on the site. We have an exhibit. It's called Songs of the Labor Movement.
Excellent.
And Joe Hill is perhaps the most famous song of the labor movement.
We've got Pete Seeger.
We have Pete Seeger. We have the whole litany of songsters and the whole range of songs.
What about civil rights songs?
We have civil rights songs. For example, we have an exhibit about the Congress of Racial Equality. And this exhibit focuses on Martin Luther King and my husband, Marvin Rich, who was the Community Relations Director of the Congress of Racial Equality. And it focuses on some of the leaflets, the brochures, the songs of the old freedom riders, because of perhaps all of the things that CORE did. The Freedom Rides, which we celebrate now in its 50th anniversary. The Freedom Rides are the most well-known.
It's interesting that you talk about this. When you talk with young people in the 20s and 30s, many of them don't even know the Freedom Rides existed, and if they do know, it didn't make any difference. Clearly, the Freedom Rides were one of the things that changed this country.
Absolutely, and you are right. Now, I just came back from Chicago from a reunion of the Freedom Riders, where we met for 4 or 5 days to revisit the entire episode. Now, Oprah Winfrey got wind of this, and we were originally going to meet in Washington, D.C., but she said, oh no, I will provide lodging and transportation to every freedom rider who wants to come to your reunion, but I'd like you to do it in Chicago because then I'll tape them all for my show, which she did, so that on May 4th, 2011, Oprah Winfrey devoted her entire show to the Freedom Riders, to the training, to the songs, to the trauma which characterized the Freedom Rides, and to listening to these young people and old people. There were a lot of old people on the Freedom Rides, describe what they did as ordinary people that changed the whole character of a country. And you're right, one of the things we have failed to do is to share with our children and our grandchildren our central role in this event.
That's very interesting because, as you know, I was a Tuskegee Airman.
Yes.
And many times people say, I didn't know you were a Tuskegee Airman, you don't talk about it. I guess when you do something to change society and society changes, you don't want to keep patting yourself on the back for what you did. On the other hand, it's important because there's so many struggles that still remain for people to understand that when you struggle and you organize, you can make change. And that's what the labor movement is about.
Exactly. I do want to say that in terms of the Freedom Rides, I've just finished a paper for the people, the core people who were in Chicago. Now the SNCC people were there too, and other people were there, talking about how we can educate our children and our grandchildren to the kinds of things we did back then. And we're going to see how some of my recommendations play out.
Well, give an example of one of your recommendations.
Well, one of them is to create a website. And on this website, we're going to call this website the Old Core because it's devoted to the principles of nonviolent direct action, which epitomized CORE and the techniques that successfully changed the country. So one of my recommendations is that we create a website, kind of like Labor Arts, called the Old Core, in which we go back and we identify all the Freedom Riders. We talk about the selection, first the conceptualization of the Freedom Ride.
Who conceptualized it?
They were two CORE members. They were field secretaries for CORE, and they were primarily organizing in the South after the sit-ins in 1960. Tom Gaither was from Rock Hill, South Carolina, and Gordon Carey, who was from someplace in North Carolina. And they happened to be on a bus on the New Jersey Turnpike returning from one of their training sessions when they hit a blizzard. And so they were stuck in this bus for a couple of hours. And they talked about the old Freedom Rides. You see, the Freedom Rides we celebrate represent the second Freedom Ride through the Lower South. The first Freedom Ride came after 1947, a Supreme Court decision, and it went through the northern or the North-South, meaning Kentucky and Tennessee, those states. And so their idea was, well, let's do this through the Lower South because the Supreme Court had recently come down with a decision called Boynton versus Virginia. And in that decision, the Supreme Court said, you cannot have these signs up in these restrooms and in these interstate bus stations separating the races, but nobody did anything. And so we had what you call de facto segregation. And so Tom Gaither and Gordon Carey said, let's organize a CORE project and let's go through the Lower South. And so that's what they did. They came back to New York. They brought it to the attention of the National Action Committee, which was the committee, the decision-making body at CORE. Everyone was very excited, so they decided, okay, we're going to raise this money and we're going to do that. And very interestingly, at the Chicago meeting, some of the SNCC people made the point that in raising the money, which CORE did, we did not get any foundation money because we were challenging something which was very much in the fabric of this country. And so what my husband did, and Marvin, he's an overlooked hero as far as I'm concerned.
He's your husband too.
He's my husband too. Marvin went out and we found people, primarily white people with money who were very responsive to this notion of freedom rides. And remember, CORE, from its inception in Chicago in 1947, was an interracial organization. And they put up the money, but the labor movement put up the money too. And it's very interesting because on one of our exhibits on labor arts about the ILGWU, which is the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, we have a section on civil rights. And we describe the role of the ILG in supporting CORE. And these locals came out and they put their bodies on the line when we were demonstrating in New York and across the country against the Woolworth 5 and 10 cent department store. Our picket lines were full of union members. So it's a classic example of the support of the labor movement for civil rights. And then the locals put up money so that when the Freedom Riders ultimately were jailed in Jackson, Mississippi, in the Parchman Penitentiary, Marvin's job was to get out on bail those Freedom Riders, CORE, SNCC, whatever, who did not want to stay in jail. He raised hundreds of thousands of dollars from these so-called wealthy, primarily whites. Now, there were blacks too. Black churches gave money. Black civic organizations gave money. The black community rallied to this project, not only by contributing Freedom Riders and the supporters of the Freedom Riders. That's very important, because when they were escaping some of these Ku Klux Klan crowds, and they were threatened with death, it was the African American, then known as Negro, ordinary citizens who took them in, who drove up and picked them up when they were abandoned on these dark country roads in the South, took them in, hid them, fed them, and got them out of that area. So this is a story that we need to tell.
And it's reflected in this site, Labor Arts, where you have civil rights, you have ILGW,
yes,
you have the CIO.
Oh,
now, the question that I'm stimulated to ask after hearing this wonderful explication of how we change society with segregation, the fact is that for many black people, situations are just as bad as they were then.
Yes.
They don't have jobs. They're still brutalized by the police. They sometimes have substandard education. Why can't we energize that type of movement again? We elected Obama. He said, change you can believe in. And then a number of people in both the black and white communities said he didn't move fast enough, but he's moving as fast as he can. But the mass background behind that doesn't seem to exist. Glenn Beck can bring a bunch of rednecks to Washington to say, we're going to take back the country. Yet when Al Sharpton had the review of the March on Washington, we didn't get quite as many people. What's in it that keeps us from doing that again?
That's a difficult question.
I
I'm not
realize,
sure
that's why I asked you.
I know the answer, but let me throw out a couple of ideas. We have moved away from what I think is an essential ingredient of the concept of nonviolent direct action. And that is that this concept is adaptable to a lot of different situations. Gandhi pioneered nonviolent direct action in South Africa first, and then he took it back to India. So for me, the question is, to what extent can we develop new strategies around nonviolent direct action and apply them to the situation we have now? Now, part of our challenge, I think, is that as people of color, we have sat back and waited for somebody else to do it. But having been to Chicago, and in my age, having been re-energized, we've decided, well, okay, we can do this right here in New York City. And it's not fair to expect Obama to do it. What we need to do is to do it ourselves, because that's what we did in the 60s. One of the, I think, important results of the Freedom Rides is that these rides were done by ordinary people, people like you and me. Now, they're the people that you're talking about. Today, it's the ordinary people who don't have jobs.
But the thing is, the target was so obvious: end segregation, end racism, end discrimination. Now it's much more subtle. For example, there's the battle over the schools, where many of the schools that are predominantly black don't achieve as well as schools that are predominantly white. And they want to close those schools. But then people in the community say, don't close our schools, make them better. And when they have a rally, and they had a rally at Tweed, they had a rally at City Hall, you don't get the thousands of people there, and you even have some African Americans defending the system as it is.
Okay.
How do you get past that?
All right, we have to use some new techniques, all right? And what might those techniques be? You're right. You see, I don't think that we should close these schools. We can turn these schools around.
And
you
done
know, I did it
Yeah.
at Andrew Jackson High School between 1980 and 85. You know, and I know that African American and Latino children are as smart as any other
Yeah, the
children.
normal curve.
It's a matter of how we provide the opportunities and make the demands that they do what they're capable of doing. So what are you suggesting? I am saying, well, let's take nonviolent direct action and let's see how we could apply it to this situation. So let me tell you what I would do. You know, if somebody came like you're doing, the first thing I would do is go to what I call the black press. Okay. Black people are still reading newspapers, like the Amsterdam News, okay? I would go to the black radio stations, okay? I would go to the black websites on the internet, okay? I would go to the black entertainers, like the rappers now. Now, when I was principal at Jackson, I didn't even know what a rap
They
was.
were just beginning.
Okay? But the rappers, and I would bring them in to New York or Chicago or somewhere, and I'd say, now look, we need to get to our community, and you're the people who can make it happen. So this is what we want you to do. We want you to use your media, and we want you, let's say we're going to have a rally in front of the Tweed courthouse. What is this, June 1st? So let's do it on, say, June 15th. We need a little lead time. I would also go out into the community and find the black artists. You know, when I was at Jackson, this graffiti was just emerging. And I recently talked with a young man who wants to put it back. We had this motto and graffiti across the athletic field at Jackson. I would bring in the artists, and I would harness all their talent. I would make posters, flyers, songs, put them on the radio, and I bet in front of the Tweed courthouse on the 15th of June, we could have 25,000 people of color. See? And then we would organize a program, and we would begin teaching, you know, defining the problem, breaking it up into small pieces, and figuring out what to do.
But one of the things that this question raises is, does the grassroots black community really understand that they have power?
No, no.
And that's because many times the media denigrates what you and I and others try to do to challenge the system. They're saying we need a corporate approach, we need this, we need that. And the average citizen, black citizen, either doesn't have the information or the energy to confront this. Although I think the impact of police brutality and poor education is beginning to energize the community, as well as unemployment. That's another thing.
Well, I think you're right. But as I said, the Freedom Rides took ordinary people, and what we have to do is do something that resonates with them. And every parent wants his child to succeed in school. And the issue is, how can we make our community understand that we have power just like they, and we need to use it. Now, you've given me some really good ideas, or maybe I've given you some that we can really harness. But I see taking this situation here in New York, and you're right. They're saying that we have to act like the corporate community. We don't have to act like the corporate community, because it's in the corporate community's interest for us to stay just the way we are, frankly.
Well, we have a different problem that we had 30 or 40 years ago, and that is the employment problem. And many African Americans have lost their jobs because they've gone overseas, and many of them don't have the skills. So job training then becomes another major aspect, which I assume the labor movement is involved in.
Yes, let me just give you a little idea. This Don Rubin, who I told you is the primary funder of the labor arts, gave a grant to a group where I serve on the board. It's called the Workers' Defense League, the WDL, and we have two training programs that I think would interest your viewers. The first one is with unemployment compensation. A lot of people are denied unemployment compensation when they are really entitled to it. And the poor worker doesn't know how to defend himself or herself. So what they do is they find out about us, meaning the WDL, through the grapevine. They call us, and we go with them to their hearing. They appeal the decision to deny them their unemployment compensation. And we win about 95% of these appeals. So that's the first thing we do. And the WDL operates on a shoestring. We get very little funding.
Is the labor movement helping to support it?
Yes, that's where we get the money. And we're having a dinner on the 22nd of June right here in New York at the UFT headquarters. Downtown on Broadway. So I can make a pitch if your readers, if your listeners see this before then, that they could buy a ticket and come to the WDL dinner. The other thing that the WDL did, and that we're now revisiting, is we ran a training program for people of color in what I call the building trades. And these were unions that did not admit blacks in the 1960s. And they had an apprenticeship program, and in order to get into this program, your father had to be, let's say, a bricklayer. Right. Well, how many blacks had fathers who were bricklayers? So we gave them the money to organize a training program for blacks in the bricklaying business. And now what we're doing is we're going back and we're looking at the results of that program in the 60s. We're going to convene a conference of all those alumni that are around. And then we're going to look to see what kinds of job training programs we can initiate with the labor movement now. New jobs. I'm not talking about jobs at McDonald's. And we're talking about training programs for new opportunities for people of color to develop new skills. Now, in that context, just let me say that with the rise of the computer technology, there was a fear of what they called, I forget, the digital divide. And the idea was that minorities and people of color would not be able to have access to all of this technological equipment and to participate fully in it. Events have shown that that's not true. You get on the subway. I came down here today on the number 2, and all these black people are on the subway, and they all have their little smartphones. And
well, clearly that's the case.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the real issue now is the demonization, the demonizing of the labor movement.
Yes.
A lot of the budget cutting in schools and public works has to do with get rid of get rid of the unions. How does labor arts help to fight that?
Okay. First off, we educate the general public about the contributions of the labor movement
to the life
over time. And people don't understand that when you work a 40-hour week, that's the result of the labor movement. They don't understand that when you have health care on your job, that's the result of collective bargaining and the labor movement. They don't understand that when they retire and they have a pension, that's the result of the labor movement. We need to tell that story, just like we need to tell the story of the Freedom Rides. And more importantly, we need to teach our children that the labor movement is there for them, just like it was there for us. And they need, with our help, to resist the efforts out there, up and down the line, to destroy the labor movement. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. Now, I mean, they have attacked what they call Obama's health care plan. It's not Obama's plan, it's our plan. There were 26 million people in this country without health insurance. And under this plan, as it unfolds, people are going to have access to adequate health care. And we need to stand up.
What we need to do as we come to the close of the show is to encourage people to look at laborarts.org to learn about the role of the labor movement in our society and look at the challenges for the future. I want to thank Evelyn Jones-Rich, the president of Labor Arts, for being with us for a very stimulating conversation. Thank you, Evelyn.
So much.